technologies.
Right.
So I believe that the philosophical and religious consensus of, for example, the Ralph M. Parsons engineers that were on the project, like my father, people like Donald Rumsfeld, obviously some of these philosopher kings of science that were connected to the project, like your William Shockleys. I think when the discussion of what they should do with the quantum access technology undoubtedly got filtered through some of the think tanks and was substantially vetted in the intelligence community and among, presidential level advisors and so forth, I think what they ultimately determined that they would do was continue to use it for contingency planning, but have a sort of hands-off policy regarding preventing the events. And maybe that was leavened by some threshold determination where if an event was really terrible, then they would intervene and try to prevent it, and then try to catch up and restore the quality of their intelligence database from that point forward. That might explain, for example, their use of Colin Powell to tell the world that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction.
Mm-hmm.
What may have happened is they had determined he was going to get weapons of mass destruction in the future based on and had made intelligence findings to that effect, but that when the U.S. and its allies then invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam Hussein's regime, they prevented the very future event that they knew he was going to commit, like, blowing up a major city or something with nuclear weapons. So I believe that the consensus opinion in the project that quantum access shouldn't be used to directly sort of control and own the future, as it will, to literally change history by changing future events, probably found its way into policy making, maybe with the caveat that if the future event is bad enough, then they should intervene to change the course of events as they were able to discern them from the point of view of the present.
You're talking about pre-crime in kind of Minority Report style here in a way, but on a geopolitical scale almost then.
Right. Certainly quantum access to data about future events gives the people in possession of it a sort of omnipotence. And I think that was dramatized in a very creative way in the film Minority Report. I believe, based on everything I was able to glean, I was observing everything that was going on. I was not only a very bright kid, but I had specialized training in the project, essentially in espionage. So when I was sitting around in these lunches and dinners with all these project people, I was really listening and following what was going on. I don't even think they comprehended that fact. And I knew that almost everybody in the project was saying, look, we're not going to get involved in quantum engineering because that's not what this is about. This is an intelligence gathering project, so we're going to know what's going to happen, but we're not going to make things happen in the future because nobody in government should have that divine authority to actually influence people's destinies substantially and literally divert the course of human history. But I do know that they were operating on the margin. They did have this intermediate position where, for example, they decided to not so much to groom, but to work with people like myself who had some discrete personal destiny that they were concerned of, that they were concerned about the magnitude of. So that involved them in things like informing future U.S. presidents of their presidencies. It involved 7 times that I've been able to document when they intervened in my life and predisposed me to know that I was going to be involved in this rollout of information about Mars. So they clearly have been operating on the threshold of influencing future events by, for example, doing briefings of people prior to the events. But I think that the policy course that they decided to set, the permanent secret government on, would be one in which they would know as much as possible about the future, but also as much as possible not try to change it, because that, of course, would undermine the very intelligence database garnered via quantum access that they were trying to create. So you have to kind of let the future happen if you're going to know about it in advance. That's the paradox.
Yes. But, I mean, the advantage here with the time travel and teleportation technology is immense. Do you know at this point if this is a technology that only the U.S. is or have been using, or have other countries has access to this technology as well, like Russia, China, or other European countries? And if so, is there any kind of fighting going on the national level here, or are they working together in these projects?
All I know regarding other countries having the technology, of course, much of my data was garnered back when I was on the project as a school child. So we're going back 40 years, to the period roughly from 1967 to 72. I do remember my father stating that, for example, when we jumped from the mid-November of 1971 to the beginning of the summer of 1973 in New Mexico, we went up to Curtis Wright, and we were greeted there by a U.S. Army officer. He was a pretty advanced one. I think he was a colonel. He may have just been a captain, but he was an officer of the U.S. Army. And he was standing there in the teleport, and he gave my dad a large cylinder, like a big mailing tube. And I remember he took the paper clips off of something he was carrying in his hand. He actually did that the first time we jumped. But as usual, I had to take off my belt and put on this cloth belt with a plastic buckle and so forth. I had those wallaby-type shoes with the cloth shoelaces, so I didn't have any metal in my shoes. And, of course, the metal in the zipper and pants is non-conductive intentionally. But so my dad was given this mailing tube, and when we got to Santa Fe, I said, "Dad, what's in the tube?" And he said, "Plans to some of our most sensitive military secrets." And then when we got back to New Jersey after completing that summer of 73, and we were back in the fall of 71, and I was quizzing him what we had done that summer after having been quantum displaced into the future and lived the summer of 73 in New Mexico before we even lived the summer of 72 in New Jersey, he explained that the government was using teleportation in this manner to hide secrets in the future, so that if the intelligence agency of another government found out, in that case, he said it was plans to our most sensitive weapon systems. And I said, what do you mean weapon systems? And he said, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, so he was jumping some of the Defense Department's missile plans to New Mexico so they could be stored there, not just presumably in underground installations, but underground installations several years in the future, which is very difficult to find if you're, let's say, a Soviet agent trying to buy or steal U.S. defense secrets. Now, when I asked him why they were doing that, why the U.S. Defense Department was doing that, he said to stay 2 steps ahead of the Soviets. So I also, when I was first investigating my teleportation experiences when I was still living in Los Angeles before I came back up to the Northwest to resume my legal career, I had a discussion with a man in Los Angeles who alleged that at the same time the former Soviet Union was also investigating teleportation. It looks like both governments have engaged in what I call the high psi fallacy, which is to state that in the late 1960s and early 70s, they were involved. I mean, the most far-out things they were involved in was working with psychics in remote viewing,
right,
and had not yet developed time travel. But my guess would be that there was a program of the former Soviet Union, but that it wasn't as effective as ours because we used ours to in effect, win the Cold War. That's another reason I'm speaking out. I mean, people have conceptions of certain major epochs in world history. And in the same way that something as preposterous but possibly valid as the fact that President Kennedy may have been assassinated because of what he wanted to do relative to the extraterrestrial situation, it would be considered heresy to say that the U.S. won the Cold War, the West won the Cold War, because it won the race for quantum access. But in fact, in some way that is true, because I know that we were using quantum access to hide our sensitive military secrets. And so there is this fundamental causal relationship between the U.S. achieving supremacy in quantum access and winning the Cold War, if in fact such a thing can be won. Clearly preventing an all-out nuclear war and essentially dismantling the former Soviet Union. So I don't know whether today Russia, China, and other countries have quantum access. They're probably aware of it. They're certainly going to be aware of it after my information is more widely disseminated. But I do believe that the U.S. Defense Department at that time really was concerned about 2 factions. I would speak of them as the Greys and the Reds. It was concerned about who the extraterrestrials were and what they wanted, and why they were visiting us, where they were from, what their agenda was, and they were concerned about the former Soviet Union. In fact, the United States government in the 60s and early 70s there was so concerned about a land invasion by the Soviet Army of the continental United States that they had a cadre of backup political and military leaders known as the Second Reserve. My father was part of it. There were individuals in American society, whether they be priests or cops or high school principals or engineers or fire captains, who had standing orders to report to certain military bases in the event that we were invaded by